which is a sustainable future for the Baltic Sea, updating the Baltic Sea Action Plan beyond 2021. My name is Urmas Lips. I am co-chair of the HELCOM State and Conservation Working Group, and I come from the Tallinn University of Technology Marine Systems Institute. And it's a great honor for me to introduce and moderate this session, which is organized by the HELCOM. You know that this event is devoted to the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region, and we asked the question, what will come after 2020? But there are many other initiatives or programs or activities around that also ask the same question, because the time frame is quite coinciding, I should say. And one of those is the Baltic Sea Action Plan, which was adopted at 2007. And now, this year in March, the Ministerial Meeting of HELCOM, they decided that we have to update this action plan, and we have to think what will come after 2021. And it means that it's a very nice event to organize this seminar together with the strategy of the Baltic Sea region. And this seminar will have 2 presentations and then panel discussion. But I would like to ask the panelists come to here, and you can have, and you see the presentations on screens, and maybe you have some immediate questions then to the presenters, and we can start this discussion even earlier. First, I would like to ask Ambassador Maira Mora, Director General of the Permanent Secretariat of Council of the Baltic Sea States, please. Then Veronica Manfredi, Director of Quality of Light Directorate, European Commission, DG Environment. Harry Liiv, Deputy Secretary General, Ministry of the Environment, Estonia. Sara-Sofia Sireen, Baltic Sea Parliamentary Conference Rapporteur regarding eutrophication of the Baltic Sea, Member of Parliament, Finland. And Ottilia Toresson, Director, World Wildlife Fund, Baltic Ecoregion Programme. And the first presentation will be given by Monika Stankiewicz, HELCOM Executive Secretary. And Monika will present the results of the report, which is about to be published soon, State of the Baltic Sea. Please, Monika.
Yes, thank you very much. Can I have my PowerPoint on? On the big screen? Oh, it's there. Thank you. So, welcome to the seminar, and I'm happy to have such distinguished colleagues to be in the panel. I'm really looking forward to what you are going to say, and also I encourage the audience to think how we could design the process for the future in such a way that it will be successful for the update of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. There has been already some information on the State of the Baltic Sea report, so I will tell more results of it. It is the outcome of large-scale collaboration among the Baltic Sea countries, and it covers more aspects than ever seen before in our regions, and provides a scientific evaluation of the environmental status for the years 2011-2016, and assesses pressures and impacts from human activities, as well as includes social and economic information for the entire Baltic Sea. The reports will be published in a few weeks' time, the final version of it. And the report shows that the status of the marine environment of the Baltic Sea continues to be unsatisfactory, and recovery is not yet sufficient to achieve the goals and objectives of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. And the result of it could be summarized in the figure like that, where you can see both the pressures and the status of the marine environment. The pressures that are assessed in this figure include eutrophication, hazardous substances, introduction of non-indigenous species and extraction of fish via commercial fishing, and the status of biodiversity includes benthic and pelagic habitats, fish in the open sea and coastal areas, seals and birds. And both the pressures and the status for the Baltic Sea are assessed here, showing the proportion of area in square kilometers covered by different assessment status categories, from not good, poor status to good status. An exception is only commercial fishing, where the summary is not for an area, but it's for the fish stock. So it shows that the figure that in general the majority of fish, birds, and marine mammals, as well as benthic and pelagic habitats of the Baltic Sea are still not in a healthy state, and the deteriorated status is seen in all parts of the food web. Eutrophication persists, and even though the levels of inputs of nutrients are lower than for many years, levels of contaminants remain elevated throughout the Baltic Sea. However, we can also see that the situation is not generally deteriorating. Some substances are now considered to be of lesser concern, and smaller amounts of certain hazardous substances, such as cadmium, mercury, and lead, are ending up in the sea. On the other hand, we also know that there are new substances of concern continually emerging. There are around 140 non-indigenous species that have so far been recorded in the Baltic Sea, and of these 12 are new for the Baltic Sea in the assessment period. And the updated results compared to the first version also shows that for commercial fishing, that there are 3 out of 11 commercial fish stocks that are in good status with respect to both biomass and fishing mortality rates. However, 10 stocks currently lack proper evaluation. And other topics such as marine litter, underwater noise, and seafloor disturbance and bycatch are also known pressures on the Baltic Sea. These are discussed in the report as well and are the focus of HELCOM work to develop regional agreements on threshold values, methodologies and approaches to ensure future quantitative assessment that it can be made. And on top of it, we have a climate change evident already today, which will compound existing pressures on the marine environment. This is the figure I'm bringing and again, and it is about the significant reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus that has been achieved. There has been many measures behind this, I would say, success story, and a lot of effort over the years. Still, the reductions are not sufficient, and even they have been achieved. The long history of nutrients in the Baltic Sea, lasting over decades, enhances the time until effects of eutrophication management are to be expected. We have in HELCOM also a close follow-up system to see the results for individual sub-basins. So here you can see 7 sub-basins and also how the situation is in terms of reaching or being within acceptable levels of nutrients inputs to them. So we still have some red signs showing that the targets are not reached everywhere. The reports also give a snapshot of what are the cumulative impacts on the marine environment from various pressures in the Baltic Sea. This has been an immense effort to collect some 100 spatial data sets representing human activities, pressures, and ecosystem components to derive this regional picture of pressures and impacts. And based on the results, we know that top 4 pressures ranked by cumulative impact at regional scale are eutrophication, hazardous substances, non-indigenous species arrival, and extraction of fish. As a novelty in HELCOM, the State of the Baltic Sea report has taken steps to further develop socioeconomic aspects, integrating the human aspects and providing a better basis for understanding benefits of environmental protection and management. And for instance, losses in recreational values due to the deterioration of the marine environment are estimated by HELCOM to be 1 to 2 billion euros annually. We have already brought up today the reasons for not reaching the good environmental status yet. I will not repeat those, but instead I will go directly to the Baltic Sea Action Plan update, and what kind of mandate has been given by ministers as regard to this process. So the mandate is, and the request is that, and the commitment is that the updated Baltic Sea Action Plan should be based on, continue to be based on ecosystem approach, fully use the precautionary principle, be supported by fit-for-purpose scientific research, be strongly communicated with stakeholders, enable knowledge sharing between science and policy across all levels, and be developed in a participatory and transparent way at the regional and local levels, including all appropriate stakeholders, and also give due consideration to economic and social impacts of the measures to be taken to meet its objectives. I consider it very ambitious for the process to be had, and I'm really looking forward what kind of advice you can give, how we can fulfill this ministerial commitment, and how we can have an inclusive process to arrive at the updated Baltic Sea Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. And this is the reason why we have to think about the update of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. That, as you saw, that something has been reached, but far not the all objectives. And we have to think how to reach the objectives, or how to think what are the most important objectives. But we have the other presentation, which also will give some insight that where we are in the Baltic Sea region. And I ask Ottilia Thorsson, Director of the World Wildlife Fund Baltic Ecoregion Program. And you have produced the Baltic Sea Action Plan Scorecard 2018. And as I noted, you have some copies available over there. If you are interested in printed copies, they are there, but Ottilia will have.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've all enjoyed your lunch, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be here and to present the scorecard. And I think this is a nice follow-up after Monica's presentation on actually the HOLES report, which I think is a fantastic report to really get us to the point to understand how the Baltic Sea looks like. And to that, I just want to introduce my organization before I talk a little bit about the report itself. So I'm part of what is called the WWF Baltic Ecoregion Program. We've been working in this region for decades, since the early 90s, and we're comprised of different WWF offices around the region, as well as long-term partners in the Baltic Sea states and in Russia. And together we work on conservation of the Baltic Sea, but also the sustainable use of its resources. And we have for many years been flagging the poor situation of the Baltic Sea, and have come with suggested solutions of how we can address this, and how to improve the governance of this joint sea that we cherish so much, that we call the Baltic. And I think it's becoming more and more clear to us, and I think the HOLES report really pinpoints this as well, is that the challenges that are facing the Baltic are growing at a much faster rate than we are able to counter them. So let's see. Yeah, so WWF has had a tradition of actually producing scorecards since the birth of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. The idea really was to showcase how this action plan is doing over the years. And all of these reports have repeatedly showed that the implementation of the Baltic Sea Action Plan it needs a lot more strength, but also that there needs to be a more coordinated effort to deliver on these commitments. And I think it's important to underline that these assessments that we've done are not looking at the biological state of the Baltic Sea, but rather it's an analysis on the degree to how the governments have actually followed up on their commitments in the action plan. The reasons why we have done these reports, I think, is that we believe it's valuable, that we continue to evaluate the performance of the countries and also inform this to a wider public. HELCOM is a very important regional body, but the public isn't necessarily accessible to understand all the complexity it has. And I think no matter what agreement or declaration, no matter how ambitious it is, will not have any success if it's not as equally ambitious in its delivery and implementation. So I'll give you a short brief on the results of the scorecard. This really much follows the action plan in terms of the 4 themes in the action plan, so eutrophication, hazardous substances, biodiversity, and maritime activities. Since the last one that we did in 2013, we've actually seen there has been a great momentum in terms of the concept of blue growth. So blue growth strategy that's come out of the EU. There's also regional sustainable growth agenda for the region. And under the current chairmanship of HELCOM, which is run by the EU, there is also a segment there on innovations of sustainability in blue economy. So we thought it would be interesting to also have this as an assessment criterion, looking how the countries have done in terms of performance in balancing their economic benefits of the maritime sector with restoring and improving the environment. So essentially, this report looks at how the political commitments have been met by all the 9 countries, the contracting parties, and what actions have been achieved since the last scorecard that we did in 2013. We have used the methodology based on a new database that HELCOM has set up, Explorer database it's called, where basically all the reporting is collected from all the regions and all the countries. So the accuracy of our action analysis is basically limited to the quality of the reporting from the countries. The scoring is divided by action deadlines. So we have chosen those where deadlines mainly have already passed or about to pass. It has been really challenging, I have to say, to track the progress. Sometimes these actions have changed dates, or they've been merged together, or they've changed names. So we have had to do quite an extensive work to put this together. And we have tried to use a very simple traffic light system to give you this scoring. So red being that the deadline has not been met in time, so it has failed to do this. Yellow, where progress is about exactly met, almost met, so it means that it's okay. And then green, of course, is that the actions have been delivered before their timelines, so excellent progress. So let's have a look. This is the summary, a snapshot of the results. And as you can see, the results are pretty bleak and unsatisfactory. All countries have essentially failed in this class. There has essentially not been enough progress, and we're seeing that all countries are lagging behind on their commitments. If we are to compare to 2013, actually there is more improvement this time around. In the previous scorecard, we only had Finland and Germany who showed yellow when it came to eutrophication. But now we see that there are countries which have a wider breadth in hazardous substances of attaining yellow or green. And I think we have to give credit to Denmark and Finland for actually achieving on 2 different segments. And I would say the winner of this class is actually Sweden, although, as you can see, it's the winner of a very poor class. So I wouldn't say it's a winner, but it's just better in the failing performance overall. And you may be wondering, like we wondered, how is this possible? How can all these countries be failing? Well, when we looked at HELCOM's assessments, it was quite clear by the implementation of the actions why. In the HELCOM Explorer, there are 177 actions with deadlines. If you take away the ones that have passed, there's 103 actions. And of those, only half, almost only half of those have still not been accomplished totally or even started. So what I want to readdress as well is actually within HELCOM, we see that the joint actions that are delivered together, very much steered by HELCOM, about 70%, I think we heard this morning, have actually been accomplished. But it's actually the national actions where there's a lot of lagging behind. And I think it's important to remember that the nations themselves are still lagging on this and need to do this. We only have 3 years to go until the set deadline. I was asked to give a little bit of detail for each theme. The tables are quite long. Like I said, the report is over there, so you're more than welcome to take a copy. But the tables are quite long, so I was just going to give you a little short summary for each of the themes. When it comes to eutrophication, it's clear here that the poor rating is really that none of the countries have actually achieved their nutrient reduction program targets as set up in the action plan. I think it's only Denmark who've actually implemented on nitrogen, and it's just come out that they've actually done a misassessment on their ratings, so we will see where this lands in future. But there's really a mixed bag on ratings for the countries when it comes to agriculture reduction on nutrients, where we see poor performance on guidelines and standards for nutrient content in manure, nutrient accounting, for example, also implementing and enforcing the prevention of pollution from agriculture. So if we look at hazardous substances, overall, the countries have actually an okay to good progress in this category. However, we see that the trends of the contaminations are not yet changed since 2010. And the concerning part is that the contaminant levels are much higher in the organisms than they are in the sediment or the water column. So there is an accumulation going on in the different trophic levels. Monica also mentioned cadmium, mercury, lead. We clearly see this as well in our scoring, that, for example, the Minamata Convention on mercury, we're still waiting for ratification for some of the countries, but also the implementation of this convention is very poor for most countries. And also there was a number of contaminants in the beginning of the action plan that were set to do an identification of how to restrict them. And these are still lagging behind in terms of doing any actions on these. So essentially on these, there's still measures to be done to address these contaminants that are still not on the list. When looking at biodiversity, I think this is the hardest theme, actually, because a lot of the other themes heavily have pressures on biodiversity. But here we see that the contracting parties have not managed to meet their deadlines for the conservation list of species, habitats, fisheries, marine mammals. I think some of this has already been mentioned a couple of times today. We really see poor status for a lot of species in all the different levels of the food web. And it's clear here that the joint actions have been accomplished, but again, it's the national actions are lagging behind. And I think very much on the iconic species like the harbor porpoise we see here, or the European eel, or the salmon, for example, are all still suffering. So essentially, we need to reverse the trend on the biodiversity and the overall food web when it comes to biodiversity. On maritime activities, good progress has been made, and actually more progress was made in 2013. And since then, these last 5 years, only 2 actions have been completed, and that is a joint submission to the International Maritime Organization on tighter regulations concerning NOx, which is a great achievement because it's only in this region that we actually have this restriction, and a compilation of the list of these invasive species. So essentially here again, we still have a lot to do, and I was just in a session earlier here about underwater noise and just how huge that pressure is, and there's still very little that we know about this in terms of research, but how do we address it? So this is also something within this category. Like I mentioned, we also had blue economy, sustainable blue economy as a category, and I just wanted to highlight a little bit of this because I think this is very also a big area within the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region, especially that you have some working groups in bioeconomy. This is essentially an area which has really been growing very big and getting a lot of momentum from a lot of governments in the region. And WWF, we saw this sort of coming, and we think that there is enormous value to unlock better management, smart investments, and accelerated innovation in our region. But to do this, we have to do it smart. And that's why we set up some principles on how to guide and set priorities when it comes to achieving a sustainable economy. Because essentially, we won't have that if we're not really investing in sustaining our natural resources and making sure that this is not systematically being degraded like we're doing today. So basically, I mean, whether it's a green, blue, circular economy, all of this really has to be set on a foundation of restoring the ecosystem health before we can actually try and profit from it. And that's why we actually did a set on looking at how sustainable blue economy could be achieved in the region. There is a lot to be done and a lot that can be played by the different sectors in the region. And that's why we were curious to see, so how far have the countries actually gone when it comes to sustainable blue economy? This is just a quick snapshot that you see here. The criteria that we set up were setting a strategy, or a policy nationally to promote sustainable blue economy, having measurable goals on these strategies, and having an allocated budget or set guidelines of cooperation between the different sectors that are in this maritime sector. And on this snapshot, you see that Sweden and Finland are making good progress, with Germany and Russia not far behind. And as I mentioned, this is a fairly new concept, but what's interesting to see is the fact that Sweden has rated green on all of these criteria we set, shows that it is possible to move forward on actually following these set principles. And we really believe that by applying these principles, we can help to alleviate some of these pressures that I've just mentioned of the 4 themes in terms of eliminating eutrophication, contaminants, protecting and restoring the ecosystem and the biodiversity, and most importantly, managing the maritime activities in a strategic way which minimizes their environmental impact. So just to finish, just a few recommendations in terms of approaching this goalpost just in 3 years' time. It's really important that the contracting parties are persistent to focus on, obviously, implementing the commitments that they've agreed on, but also reporting these promptly on their progress, with HELCOM evaluating the implementation gaps. That all types of future reform that the EU members have must be set in a regional context and make sure that these are specialized for the requirements of the Baltic. That I think HELCOM could be a great leader in terms of forming and delivering on sustainable blue economy. And last but not least, that countries must commit to increased financing to actually deliver on the action plan, but also sustainable blue economy implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was a very interesting overview and scores given to the countries. And this actually leads us to this discussion. Maybe from the audience you have some immediate questions to the presenters? No? If not, then we just will start the panel discussion, but I will still ask you after some questions to the panelists, that whether you have some interventions, comments, questions to the panelists. Okay, and we have agreed that we will now discuss something that how we will get forward, that how we will update the action plan. And actually from the last presentations, my impression is that maybe we first have to strictly follow the actions from that we already have agreed. Then maybe think that what additional we need. But since the action plan is in place and we have this agreement from the ministries that we have to update it, then maybe the first question is that we know now that there is mostly, if we take different areas or different issues concerning the environment, that the Baltic Sea environment is in poor status. And the question is, what does that mean to some other goals that we have in the region? What other goals or objectives we are not able to achieve because of that? Maybe, I don't know. You just came from, maybe you already can say something.
But just a little bit following up to that question, I think it's important that HELCOM is a regional platform, but it's voluntary. So it doesn't have the set regulations as strongly as EU policies, for example, and a lot of these countries are driven also by EU policy. And many of these policies can be contradictory in a sense. I mean, you have the agriculture policy, the fisheries policy, which also have different agendas. And I think that's when the struggle is, that when the policies are not in cohesion, it's difficult to drive these goals fully, because you have different sectors and interests that are also playing in this region. If that was answering your question, maybe I...
Yes. But maybe Sarah, yes.
Well, yes, obviously the bad condition of the sea impacts pretty much everything which is done around the Baltic Sea region. The sea is crucial to all Baltic Sea states, and it doesn't mean only the natural heritage, but well-being, health, and livelihood of the tens of millions of people who live around the Baltic Sea. So therefore, I don't think we should see this only as a question of the environmental impacts, as it has impacts to healthcare and economy and social sector as well.
Yes, really?
If I look on goals for development and look activity in our region, then certainly already mentioned sectors like fishery and agriculture. For sure, that status what we have right now may affect to our effectiveness to work on those sectors. One example with those fish farms, for example, we cannot put additional pressure to water body if the water body is already in good status. That means that we need to think over the compensative measures and to put certain resources into that business in that way that not to harm the water body more than we did so far. And agriculture already previous sessions also discussed that certainly that's a question mark how we're going to improve and to keep that on more sustainable way and to support those activities what are really not so harmful for environment and just to avoid additional nutrients to flow into the Baltic Sea. Again, where we must put more our support to activize activities, that's the question. But if we are not keeping into account our status with our Baltic Sea, then certainly there is a potential threat that we may suffer the Baltic Sea even more. Therefore, it's our task to think those activities very in a complex way.
Okay, it means that sustainable blue growth, those objectives, for example, we have to have a good status of the sea, but then we also would like to develop something at sea, like aquaculture and so on. But we are not able to do that if the status is like it is, because of some other activities or the history. Okay, please.
Yes, from my side, basically to say we have the privilege here of having a very holistic assessment which has been done with a clear identification of the top 4 pressures that are making the recovery so difficult. It means going really to the root causes, which are the sources of this excessive presence of nutrients that lead to eutrophication. What are the things that are not functioning for better protecting biodiversity? What should be changed for marine activities? What are the measures to be tackled to put in place for reducing hazardous substances? And honestly, there is an answer to each of these questions, because we know also what are the root causes of each of these problems. And on top, we have legislative instruments at European level that are really helping to reach these objectives. There is also a lot of funding support. Talking about biodiversity, the college has just proposed an increase of almost 60% of the LIFE program, which has an entire strand really devoted to help biodiversity. So I think that now it's just about sitting together at highest political level and agreeing also on some transboundary cooperation agreements with all the relevant stakeholders. Baltic fish should be included, of course. The Council of Baltic State is a very important partner together with HELCOM. And I think the European Commission can provide also a platform for discussion to be very strategic and very targeted. I also repeat what I've said in the plenary session. I think that a very important missing ingredient continues to be awareness raising And when I mention awareness raising is not only the general awareness raising for citizens, that really they should grasp more what's happening in the Baltic Sea, but also targeted training and awareness for those categories of market stakeholders that should change progressively their modes of production, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And since my organization that I represent, the Council of Baltic Sea States, was just mentioned, I would like to a little bit to turn around your question slightly, not what the poor state of the Baltic Sea, how it affects other areas, but there are other areas that affect the state of the Baltic Sea that we hope on our side that your new action plan will take into account, and that is urbanization, aging society, increased pressures from migration, and accordingly also changing consumption patterns. Also risks implied by the increased military presence and activity in the region. And that it is important, I think, also to take proper account of the need to deepen cooperation between the sectors, more integrated policy planning, and interaction between different layers of society, and engagement of stakeholders in the implementation of planned actions to save the sea.
Okay, thank you. But from the audience, do you have any questions to the panelists or some your own thoughts? Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mikael Durkin, Coalition Clean Baltic. I just have a comment rather than a question. I actually feel, listening to CBSS, that we should all understand that this is not their plan, this is our plan. So Baltic Sea Action Plan is something bigger, and that should be cross-sectorial, and that should be one of the elements of the revision of the Baltic Sea Action Plan to show that ecosystem approach should be applied sector-wise, cross-sectorially. So it is not just about environmental improvements, it is about sustainable development in the region, in fact.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have to agree with that. If not more, okay, please.
Yeah, just to continue from this comment, I totally agree, and I think this is one of the basic questions that we need to address. Like we heard, we are lacking behind national implementation. It's not like we don't know what we should be doing. We should know. We've talked about these topics for 30 years, and we have plenty of commitments and programs that we are committed to. But we are lacking implementation on a national level because we are not seeing that it's a shared program and it's a shared challenge. And instead of thinking about our national benefits, we should be thinking about the general benefits of having a better state of the Baltic Sea. And when your question was, how does a bad status of the Baltic Sea affect other goals around the region, I think the answer is that a bad status of the Baltic Sea has negative impacts to the 85 million people living in the area of the Baltic Sea region. And if you turn it around, a better status of the Baltic Sea would in fact have positive impacts to the 85 million people living around the Baltic Sea region.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
No, just to follow up on that, I mean, I think the HOLAS report nicely shows that in the socioeconomic aspects of if we had achieved the eutrophication, I believe it was 4 billion euros or 4.2 billion euros. And we did a report as well in terms of looking at if you had a good state of the Baltic, you would actually gain about 500,000 more jobs in the region, and you would gain an economic value much much higher. So I think we should also bring in this human well-being aspect and what kind of economics you could get from having a very good functioning ecosystem, which we don't have today. So I think we're thinking very short term, and we need to be thinking long term, that it's some investments we need to do now, which actually will give us more back in return for both the environment, but also for the socioeconomic aspect.
But actually, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because when I have been talking to people, even from the universities, all those assessments or estimates that how much we lose, they are taken like these are some very rough estimates. So we are not certain that we, and I think that we have to do something to explain it to people that this is actually, that we really lose something.
Yeah, if I can just follow up, absolutely, they are rough estimates, but sadly enough, I think for us that work with the environment, to make other sectors understand the value of our environment, you have to put it in euros, you have to put it in dollar bills, you have to put it in economic terms so that you can get other sectors in the region to understand the value of it. Just to talk about the beauty or the value of an environment just hasn't gone that far. And I think we've all realized that we have to also show the benefits for human well-being, because that's the first thing that is important for most people in your day-to-day life.
Okay, yes, please.
May I add a very practical, a very quotidian and very down-to-earth example? I was very impressed last September in Hamburg. There was a Baltic Sea Parliamentary Conference, and the German scientists from north of Germany had made a study, and it is in consonance what you just said about 85 million people living around the Baltic coast, and consumption patterns that were mentioned, and the general perception of the public that pollution and the poor state of the Baltic Sea is due to the fishing vessels, underground noise, discharge of used fuel, whatever, agriculture. But it is, I suppose, not all 85 million, but in good weather conditions in summertime, they go to the beaches and they cover their bodies with sunscreens and with oils, and then they go into the sea. And the figures that were presented were dramatic, and it touched me deeply, because it is our everyday pattern. And if public awareness on that level could be reached about the consequences of our actions, then I think we could also go to more, how to say, heavy stuff, hard stuff.
Yeah, okay.
I just want to follow that, because I've heard a lot about consumption, about public awareness, about it's all our public behavior that also needs to change. And I absolutely agree on that. And I do think there's a lot we can do as individuals, but also to raise that awareness. However, I don't think it's just us as consumers that have a role to play. I think it's the whole chain. It is from the consumer all the way up through the markets, the private sector, to the political government decision-making bodies. I think it's the whole sphere that we need to be addressing. But absolutely, the consumers, your day-to-day behavior has a lot of impact. But I just want to stress, let's not point at the individual be the one. I think also decision-makers have a responsibility to also see these dangerous products, these things are out there, and to already prohibit those instead of waiting for the consumers to come with saying this is not good enough.
Okay, thank you. And now we have to think that how we will organize this update of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. And the thing is that this is not a standalone activity. There are many other action plans or strategies or some even United Nations goals. And also the Council of the Baltic Sea States, that you have Baltic Sea 2030. Is it so? That and it would, as you just said, that this is not just HELCOM Baltic Sea Action Plan. We have to take into account the whole spectrum and what is going on in different fora. And what are your suggestions that what we or how we have to organize, or what are the main issues that we have to bring up?
I'm very thankful for the first reaction from the audience. that it is not just the HELCOM issue, that it is and that coincides very much with the three priorities of our council, that is a safe and secure region, sustainable and prosperous region with identity, expressed regional identity. And I think that first of all, what binds our council and our Baltic 2030 Action Plan, it is the implementation, the status of implementation of the UN SDGs in the Baltic Sea region. What binds us, our organizations, is goal number 14, that is conserve and sustainably use the resources of oceans and seas and marine resources. And it is not only our expert group on sustainable development, of which HELCOM is well, in general, they are our strategic partner, but there is an active member, but also a recently renamed expert group on sustainable maritime economy. It also deals with this goal number 14. And I've already expressed the wishes for your new action plan, what could be included. And I would like to reiterate that is the acceptance of the general public of what is being, of the actions planned, raising awareness of the people, in addition to what I already said, and links between the marine environment and economic activity in the Baltic Sea region that requires, of course, cross-sectoral approach and involvement of all the stakeholders and also actions at the grassroots level in order to change consumption patterns harmful for the environment. And I think also our today's seminar serves this purpose because, as it was mentioned, it's not only governments, it's us who have to reach out and inform and change the mindsets and change the try to influence the mindsets and consumption patterns.
Thank you. Veronica, how you see it from the European Commission side? How this our activity in the Baltic is linked to other European actions or strategies?
The picture is very clear because, I mean, we have legal obligations under the European acquis for all of the 8 contracting parties, so with the only exception, of course, of Russia, that are bound also by the acquis. So we are carrying out an assessment of the functioning of the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which is obliging all member states to reach good ecological status of the sea by 2020. So what is going to happen or not in the Baltic Sea is directly relevant for checking their compliance. 2018-2020 is a really crucial period in general for the water legislation because we have launched a fitness check on the entire legislation about Water Framework Directive and related directive, groundwater, etc. So also a moment of public consultation, engagement with stakeholders. Part of this fitness check is the fitness check evaluation also of the Urban Wastewater Directive, again, binding all member states to secure that there is a good treatment of the water that comes from our sewage system. This has been a very important enabler for reaching good status of our bathing waters. A few days ago, the European Environment Agency presented once again the status of bathing waters with rather good results for the majority of the member states. So everything seen from our perspective is intertwined, and it's really, these are very, very important years for checking compliance and seeing how well member states have been progressing. But I was also thinking it's a very important period for increasing the participatory involvement of the citizens. Why not imagine a process for elaborating the next, the post-Baltic Sea Action Plan in a manner that really outreaches the younger generation, the younger actors out there, different business and market representatives, so next to, of course, to all the institutional actors. It should be a moment of common reflections. And again, there I think digital technologies can help us. If we have today Google Street Views that allow us to map where different houses are, what impedes us to capture what's happening in the Baltic Sea on a, I would say, day-by-day basis, and to create apps that allow informing the public about what's happening in that part of the Baltic Sea closest to where I live. Even before going to the beach, just to take up on your idea, you know, small reminders about certain things you should maybe not do before going to have your next recreational moment in the Baltic Sea. So I think there is a lot we can imagine, but let's start maybe by having very, very wide public consultation to generate and spark some more interest outside the institutional arena only, which already is challenging to bring together, but I think we are getting there more and more.
Really, as I assume you are very much involved already in this process of making first steps for the new Baltic Sea Action Plan in HELCOM, that you have thought already that who has to be involved or how this has to be organized, or what are the thoughts from the Ministry or HELCOM side?
I think we rather give the floor to Monica on this one, because she's representing truly HELCOM, and she can enter into more details. But
maybe Harry Liiv can say something. I guess
thank you. Yes, of course, Monica is certainly in business and know all those details. But if express some general views and compare maybe the situation what we had 2007 when this Baltic Sea Action Plan was issued, and right now where we are, then for sure we should take into account nowadays knowledge and to see the problems more in a complex way. When at that time we focused on priority areas, so far at least eutrophication and fishery and also hazardous substances are on our agenda up to now, and still we are aware that we are behind with our activities taking into account those goals. But we need to include also new aspects or additional aspects what we didn't cover so far, like marine litter, underwater noise, microplastics, and all related issues around that. Of course, the whole process, maybe, as was said, should be more proactive, organized to invite more stakeholders into that business, and with that to ensure also the practical implementation ways. Maybe we see more activities also inviting private sector into that business more in a practical way, and to include that economical aspects and intersectoral approach, because when we're looking to different goals and keeping in mind the task under sustainable development, then we need to see how we really reach to those goals and what we can do with our waters, and here especially with Baltic, how we are able to help economy also to develop and taking into account those resources what we have. So old ones together with new ideas and with new technology. That should be maybe from my side as wish what we would like to see in new plans.
And you have from the parliamentary side, how you feel that how you could participate, or how you see the role, or your role in this process?
Well, I do think that it's a good thing that we are ready to update the action plan. For sure, many things have changed and time has passed, but I would really like to see it as an update rather than a new action plan, since there still remains things to be achieved from the current action plan. And what worries me is that if we open up the whole action plan and its content, is that we cannot afford to come down in the level of ambitiousness. The targets need to remain at least as ambitious as they are now, if not even more ambitious, since we know that, for example, in regard to eutrophication, climate change will only make the situation worse. So even though the states have not been able to meet the targets that the countries have committed to, we still need to stick to the ambitious level of target setting. This is my number one message that I want to say also to Finland and my own government, now that the situation is topical. Of course, there needs to be a linkage to the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 targets. There needs to be a linkage to the Paris Agreement, but these are only obligations and commitments that we've made. And the challenge remains the same. We still need to focus on implementation. This is the only thing that will actually make the sea better and the status better. So it's not about the paperwork or the process. We need to implement the commitments that we've done. And for example, in eutrophication, which is the most familiar to me, we are still battling with the very basic same questions that we were when HELCOM started its work. Agriculture is still the main cause of the nutrients that are creating eutrophication. And the positive news that we have had in regard to the status of the Baltic Sea are mostly thanks to better wastewater treatments. But in many countries, the flow of nutrients has actually become worse than it has been before, despite of the agreements and commitments that we've made. So this is the challenge to my own government and to all states around the Baltic Sea region, that updating the action plan is a good thing. We need to be up to date, and we need to base our agreements on new data, knowledge, and research. And both of the presentations that we heard in the beginning are very important in this regard. But still, implementation is the key.
Yeah, thank you. I agree very much with your, I would say, primary or main message. Tilly, do you have anything to say?
I think I have a question for everyone in the panel. I mean, if implementation, as we see, is the lacking force, how do we get implementation to happen?
Yes.
It's the big elephant in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
The HELCOM works via the recommendations, and then it's up to countries to implement those recommendations. And there are many things to do. But I think that we have several times already said here that awareness raising and involvement, and then I guess that people could understand that this is something that we have to do.
But I think it came from you, from the Commission, saying also we need to have it on a higher level in the leadership. I think environmental ministers, and I think this forum is really good, but we need to get other ministers, we need to get interest at a higher level where there is more mandate to really see the cohesion of the different policies to make sure that we're driving the right way. And I think that is one of the big hurdles that we are facing, that we've been facing since the beginning of the Baltic Sea Action Plan.
Yes?
I want to complement this by saying that the highest level, therefore the UN Sustainable Development Goals, it is the highest level, the highest international level possible. And the countries have committed themselves to these goals, therefore they are a very good basis for following or driving the implementation. I think that already is, and in most countries it's not the Ministry of Environment, it is in many countries it is at the prime minister's level coordination of SDG implementation.
Yep, thank you.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think in this region, we could actually help that momentum by trying to use the SDGs as the opportunity for leadership. However, I believe it's CBSS who had just done a report looking at the SDGs and how the countries are following it. And the target on 14 oceans is very low for all these countries. So I think ocean literacy is definitely needed, education there. But I think we also need to, in all our different forums, raise this understanding. And I think there's also a misconception by some countries that the SDGs is not for the, the old countries, but more for the developing countries. And we have to make sure that we have to also do our part here. I get that sense, and I might be wrong, but I get a little bit of that sense sometimes. But I think this mapping that's been done by CBSS shows very clearly that we have a lot to do in terms of raising that awareness and trying to link that leadership with SDG goals and that momentum that can give us. Absolutely.
Okay, may I now ask also audience that your comments or maybe direct questions to the panelists about this, so how this process should be organized and what are the main questions? Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Christina Weidemann from Baltic Environmental Forum. I would like to ask a question really about the implementation and coherence between different policies. On Friday, a new proposal for common agriculture policy has been published. Is there any word about protecting marine environment? We know from HELCOM reports that the main pollution from diffuse sources is agriculture. How this is taken into account at European level?
Yes, the 365 billion euro which have been proposed by the Commission for the next common agricultural policy are very much thought also to help this greening of the agricultural sector. This has been the result of a lot of internal talks, I can assure you, including between the DG Environment and DG Agri and many other sectors. I think there is a growing awareness across the board about the fact that agriculture possibly is by now the sector that really needs to accelerate its environmental efforts the most. Because we see it not only from a water perspective, so marine environment, but also very much from an air quality perspective, where ammonia, which very much comes out of manure treatment, for example, continues to remain one of the pollutants which is the least tackled so far. So whereas in transport sector we witness overall good improvements, the battle is still not won, but I mean, we are on a good track, and the Commission has recently tabled a third mobility package that is going to further reduce the level of pollutants coming from road vehicles in particular, but also maritime sector, as I was saying in the previous section. In the previous session, I've seen a lot of improvements thanks to an improvement of the fuels used by ships. For agriculture, much more needs to be done. And this is precisely one of the sectors for which personally I believe maybe could be an idea to organize some ad hoc awareness raising, training activities. And when I mention these activities, for me, the name of the game always is make implementation happen. I don't see the process as something that is, let's say, separate from the main goal of making implementation happen. I think we should not leave governments and prime ministers, for how important they are in coordinating the job, alone in the battle, but we should increase the public pressure. If the European Commission is in a position today to present an ambitious proposal, like the one it has presented last week on single-use plastic, going as far as to say we're going to ban the use of a number of items which are most frequently used on our beaches, it's because the public perception about the unacceptability of this phenomena has increased. So you have to create an environment where you make it easier for the political decision maker to go ahead. And that's why I think that, yes, citizens do make a difference, but of course they're not the only actors, and you have to work with industry very much as well. And industry is changing its language, if I may say. Maybe again, a bit less in the agricultural sector. That's why I would personally consider very appropriate to continue working with them very much. But everyone is seeing that a much more sustainable way of producing and consuming in Europe is the way forward. Last but not least, I wanted to mention to this audience, maybe people already know, but the European Commission is currently working a lot on a Sustainable Finance Action Plan. We adopted a couple of weeks ago an impressive package of measures, basically all meant to boost more public and private partnership to finance truly sustainable investments in big infrastructure, in greener infrastructure. And this has been welcomed very much by institutional investors, banking sector, insurance sector, people that manage big amounts of money, who all see that this is the direction where the economy will be going over the next decades. So I don't think we are in a period of shortage of money. It's about coming up with the right ideas to stimulate good uptake of these funding opportunities. And that's why I was mentioning, in my view, the most important thing now is to come up with very strategic, targeted actions to tackle the root causes of what is still not tackled in the Baltic Sea in particular.
No more comments to this? Maybe you have more questions to the panelists? For example, this I heard about this agriculture, and it's quite clear that when we now update the Baltic Sea Action Plan, that all these farmers' organizations, that they have to be involved. And maybe there are others that we have to mention right now, that who has to be in the process. It's not just the HELCOM or those who are working for the HELCOM, but there are many other organizations that have to be part of that. And then maybe all these commitments that we write there, they will take them as their own commitments. Okay, please.
Yeah, sorry, I do not want to take over the microphone, of course, but I'm just tempted to speak particularly about the awareness and bringing up the knowledge and messages and whatever wish lists from the grassroots level, because we're working at the grassroots level throughout the whole catchment with 11 nations, not only the coastal states. And I'm wondering, of course, then what would be then a mechanism of bringing these messages from public? Because, well, we can, of course, provide HELCOM and any of the stakeholders with plenty of wishes and demands from the public on how the future Baltic Sea Action Plan should look like. So I do understand that this is a challenging task, of course, for the HELCOM Secretariat, how to arrange that. And there is a mandate from the ministries and ministers to have the process transparent, open, inclusive, and addressing stakeholders in the best way. Talking about the sectorial stakeholders and your question, Urmas, about whom else we should involve. And certainly besides farmers and farmer associations with whom we are working already, I mean not CCB directly, but together with WWF, for example, we certainly need to have fishermen on board and fisheries organizations on board. Because without having them on board, likewise as agricultural sector, we will not be able to tackle two major challenges, agriculture and fisheries. So these are the two pressure factors that we need to address in the revision of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. Otherwise, well, of course we can improve advanced wastewater treatment technique, but that will be just a bit of the whole work that needs to be done.
Thank you. Some immediate reactions? No? Yes, please.
Well, I really believe in the potential of circular economy, the way of doing everything that we do in a more smart way, and also benefiting the Baltic Sea. An example from eutrophication, we all know that agriculture is in fact still the biggest cause of the nutrients that cause eutrophication. But I don't think the solution is to say that you are the cause, but rather to say that you could be the solution. This could be the solution. We would have ways of production in agriculture that would be beneficial for the sea, for the environment, but also for the farmer. So including them in the discussion in the positive way of the billions of euros that have said to have potential in circular economy if we are able to adapt these new ways of doing and thinking.
Okay, thank you. Attila?
Yeah, if I can touch upon that, I do worry sometimes that we throw out these words like circular economy, blue economy, green economy. There is a lot happening already. We are already working with farmers like CCB has mentioned, where we're actually showcasing farmers who are doing circular economy today. In Finland, for example, we have some great farmer examples. So these measures are already there. There are farmers taking action who are being proactive, and they're not waiting for legislation or directives to be the ones steering them. They're doing it on their own because they really believe this and don't want to be the polluter of the Baltic Sea. So I think it's an excellent question that we got here about how does the common agriculture policy link to the marine issue, and it doesn't. And I have to say that the proposal that's coming out now is not very green, and it is still, again, hidden with a lot of words that there is a greening in it, but unfortunately we see that there's more money going to Pillar 1 and dropping Pillar 2, which is the more important one, where you have the Rural Development Fund programs, where you could be doing a lot more to incentivize to be doing circular economy. So again, I think there's a lot of momentum and there's a lot of things we can do, but there's a lot of voluntary measures already done, but we see that that is not enough. We can do loads of voluntary measures, and we see it in the Water Framework Directive as well, that there's been a lot of voluntary measures. But if we don't try and put a little bit more steering on things, unfortunately, we won't achieve these goals that we have at the moment. Again, it's the implementation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and since we are approaching to the end of this seminar, I have one more question, and actually it was already touched several times here, that the question is how to lift the protection of the Baltic Sea on top of the political agenda. Because this is, I think, the main question, that this is not something that we just have to do, but we are, how to say, forced to do, but it is something that should be actually at the very top of the political agenda. How we can ensure that, or what we have to do? Maybe you from the Council of the Baltic Sea States?
We are having very soon, on the 18th of June, the Ministerial Meeting of the countries of Baltic Sea States. As is not a custom, it's a regular thing. The ministers produce a declaration. Last year's declaration included the endorsement of the Baltic 2030 Action Plan. Now it includes a reference to the implementation and encouragement of further implementation of this action plan and monitoring the situation in the Baltic Sea. So in our circles, there is a political attention to these issues, I can assure you.
Okay, thank you. Veronica?
From our side, after the signature of the very high-level ministerial declaration of the 6th of March, the focus is very much in, keeping track of progress done or not done. I think it's unrealistic to imagine that the Baltic Sea will be on top of the entire European Union agenda. We have to be a little bit proportionate, I think. But certainly the protection of marine environment remains a super important topic, and we are trying our best internally also to make sure that a very important focus on environmental protection remains in the next Commission. I have heard the critical remarks from the colleague from WWF. I must tell you that generally we are rather pleased with the proposals which have been put forward in this MFF, which are very important because somehow the name of the game that you define in this MFF, which is not only about the CAP, but it's also about the upcoming new funds under the European Maritime and Fishery Funds, what has been put forward in LIFE, what has been put forward in other instruments, will now be part of the discussion in Council and Parliament. And of course, is also a driver for influencing the next agenda of the next European Commission as such. We all have a role to play in our different roles as parliamentarians, as representative of states, etc. So yes, I mean, commitment there, but I think, again, personally, I'm an action person. I think that it would be very, very good to come up with more and more targeted and precise actions to be taken to fight the root causes of what we see happening there in cooperation with the sectors and increasing the pressure.
Thank you. Harry?
Question around political agenda. We may see different layers there. If look on European level, that's certainly such a comprehensive approach where we see regional seas and activities there. We see that activities for Baltic Sea are rather on a high political agenda. But if look countries specifically, then we also know how the political agenda may be developed and who really are the masters for that, should this or that topic will be on a highest level. And here again, I return back to awareness, because actually who are politicians? They are elected persons. They represent our people. And of course, we are all in that process to influence our politicians and to put this or that topic on agenda and to raise that up to very highest topic. For sure, we're competing with other issues what we may have in our election periods especially, but I have a practice with different ministers during my 20 years work with marine issues, then I must say that that's a rather tricky issue to propose concrete actions on political agenda from our side. Therefore, I invite all citizens and all country people to be more active when those debates are going on with the different platforms, and politicians are going out with their new dreams and plans. That's the place to put really the marine protection issue on high agenda as well. Of course, we need to keep in mind what are the main goals, how we can get benefits from that ecosystem, as we have more healthy ecosystem compared with the current one. What are really value? What are really benefits? We're talking about the benefits. We need to have a different type of benefits, not only economical benefits, but also social or cultural benefits. And there are many, many aspects we should take into account. But I must say that we all are responsible to increase that topic on a high political agenda.
Okay, thank you. Sara Sofia?
Thank you. All of these things are needed: awareness, research, pressure from the public to politicians and decision makers, and in general knowledge, still like reminding about the issue of the Baltic Sea. I mean, sometimes I hear that the topic is kind of getting old, since we're talking about the same things that were talked about in the 80s when I was born. And therefore, we still need to remind people that we haven't solved these problems. We still need to talk about eutrophication. We still need to talk about the impacts of agriculture. We need to talk about marine litter and maritime actions and all these topics, since we are still tackling the very same challenges that we have for the past decades, and they are only getting worse. All of these things are very much needed. I really believe that numbers help, statistics help. For parliamentarians and politicians, it's often really helpful to have numbers of jobs created or the potential that it has from the economic side and so forth. And therefore, it's very valuable to have these kind of reports that we've heard today as well. I guess if there would be a way that any one of us could like bring this topic as the #1 topic in the eyes of decision making around the Baltic Sea region, I think we would have done that. But it comes from small actions and bigger actions, and we all can be part of it.
Okay, thank you. Tilde?
Don't quite know what to finish off with. I think everything is been mentioned. I mean, definitely, I can only agree that we all have our roles to play in raising the awareness. My only worry is that it's only in 3 years' time we're supposed to have achieved the BSAP, and we're looking into a post-BSAP. So, well, let's see what happens in these 3 years in terms of making sure that we can deliver as much as we can and see how we can make it even better for the next action plan that will be put together.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was just thinking that there is a very important ingredient that we are not mentioning, which is the concrete enforcement actions. What do I mean? I mean, already today, there are rules in place. And if we become aware, and I think in particular, but not only, environmental NGOs can become aware, individual citizens can become aware, public authorities can become aware of illegal activities. It can be overfishing, it can be activities in breach of the Nitrates Directive, of the Urban Wastewater Directive. If we become aware, I mean, these actions should be brought up, pursued legally, made a case, because sometimes these important cases are also drivers of change per se. And on its side, the Commission is certainly committed to step up its infringement actions, because I think that as an ultimate ratio, if nothing else works for securing compliance, sometimes infringement can be a good resort also there. But I think it would be nice to see more actors for stimulating the practical enforcement on the ground. I truly believe into this. The courts are there. We have the Aarhus Convention, which secures access to justice. We should make use of the legal resources as well whenever appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add on some of the topics that were mentioned, it's sometimes funny to see how a topic actually come very popular out of nowhere. I remember like a few years back when I was talking about the worrying amount of plastics or marine litter, it was not a topic, and now everyone is talking about it. So it's just shows that these topics can end up being the big things that everyone's focusing on.
Okay, thank you very much. And we are very close to the closing this session, but I'm really happy to be here, because I was a bit afraid that how this will be, or how it will happen, because it's the first time for me, and very grateful to you that this was very, very nice discussion, and also to the audience for the questions. But before we close, I think, Monica, you have been following what was said here. Maybe you will sum up that how we will update the Baltic Sea Action Plan.
Thank you very much for your contribution. That was most interesting and useful. I think what we would be aiming at also in this round is to create the Baltic Sea Action Plan that is everyone's. And I think we did success in the previous one, and we know it can work. So for that process, we would then very much welcome everyone to join and to attend meetings, be part of the negotiation process. And we have so much intellectual capacity in the region and the knowledge that I'm confident we can come up with a good plan for the future. I would like perhaps, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for the panelists and our moderator and the audience. And I would like to maybe finalize with what I have learned recently, and it's every year or at each bigger occasion repeated that the Baltic Sea is the most polluted sea in the world. And I have learned that this is actually what people learn at universities in Korea and in all different countries in the world. For them, it is the case of most polluted sea in the world. And rarely, actually, we go outside the Baltic Sea and show that the Baltic Sea is not dead, and it will not be dead. It's beautiful, it's full of biodiversity, and we still continue enjoying it. So it's not all the time that we have algae blooms. It's not a lost case. And also the way we cooperate in the Baltic Sea is unprecedented on any scale I have ever seen. I have been in different processes globally, in other regional sea conventions, fisheries body, and we have this really a lot of power. So I have to also put a little bit of a remark on this issue of HELCOM being voluntary. HELCOM is not voluntary convention. This is a legally binding convention with very specific requirements in it, but we create on top of it a policy process because it allows us to be super ambitious. And we have also this modesty in this part of the world that we are never happy with what we do, but actually we have achieved so much that it just takes time and we have to be patient to get there. But thank you so much for the useful thoughts and for your hearts beating for the cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you, panelists. And as I understood, soon the final session will start here. Yes, okay. Thank you.